Hello and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell. This is a show that I know Amy in particular is really excited about, talking about the children's book market. She was at an event. God bless her. You were working an event, a children's book fair. And I know it was exhausting, but you got a ton of great ideas. And I'm sure that I would love to work a children's book fair again. I feel like my whole life, I've just been chasing the high that I used to get from scholastic book fairs. Like that's just, right.
It's so true. Even as an adult, you walk in and you're like, oh my gosh, you want to touch all the things and open up books. Yeah.
I know. I just love book fairs. I keep thinking, I'm like, well, maybe I could work a local one, or maybe I could just show up and pretend like I'm not a weirdo that's just showing up to a children's book. But I love the opportunity to get books out there, especially in front of kids, in front of young readers. And before we launch headlong into this podcast, which I kind of sort of already have, I just want to mention that we are really excited. Amy and I brainstormed. Actually, this was mostly Amy's idea. We were trying to figure out, do we want to do advertising for the podcast? We don't, we're not the top true crime, most popular, although I would love to have Keith Morrison, narrate some of our podcasts. I think that would be awesome.
I know, right? Could he just do our intro even?
Oh, that would be amazing. If you're not familiar with him, he is the Dateline guy. And he is such a fantastic, I just think he should narrate everything.
Exactly.
But we were brainstorming kind of some of the things that we could do. And we're going to start a Patreon page. Amy and I have decided we're going to launch that in the fall. So be on the lookout under the details page, the show notes and stuff. We'll update some of the other podcasts so that you know where to go to get cool merchandise and some really fun things that we talk about both on the podcast and other ways to get some more insider stuff. So today we're talking, as I spoiler alert, as I already mentioned, we've worked with quite a number of children's books over the years. And the team always gets excited about them because a really special children's book project can get so creative and they're extremely fun to collaborate on. And then, as I mentioned, Amy, you volunteered for your kids' book school. I don't know if it was scholastic or it was just a standard annual book fair. Either way, they're awesome. But you came back with some really great insight. In fact, I think you even texted me from the event, or maybe just after or something, because I know the event was busy and probably exhausting and exciting too.
I know. Yeah, I was taking pictures. I was texting you in between when classes showed up. Honestly, my face hurt for about 3 days because I realized after the fact that I must just be a troll because I typically don't smile that much. Yet I was smiling for hours straight at all these cute kiddos. So I was really glad that you were game for doing this because, like you said, children's book projects in particular have so many different avenues, to be creative. And we've been really fortunate with some of the books that we've worked on in the past too. So we always get really excited, when people come back, and you do so many events and you always come back with ideas. So I was like, oh my gosh, I know what that feels like now, like obviously a much smaller scale, but it was still exciting.
But what's really cool too about book fairs, first off, I love that schools are doing these. Like, as I mentioned, I spend my adulthood chasing the high that I got from the Scholastic Book Fair. And when the bookmobile would, and now I'm really dating myself, but, when like the bookmobile would come into my neighborhood and stuff like that. I mean, I just think that it is any opportunity that you have to participate in this kind of a book fair. And by this kind, I mean, not necessarily it has to be children's book fair, but, getting in front, you learn so much getting out into the masses and seeing what everybody else has out, is publishing out there. And that's one of the main reasons why I really love book fairs, not just because I'm a closet book sniffer. I do love the smell of books. But I mean, in terms of how this is going to benefit you if you're a children's book author or you want to be a children's book author, our goal for this show is to really get candid about what stands out in the children's book market and how you can set yourself up for success. Because I think that as I think you'll glean from some of Amy's talking points, which I was lucky enough to be able to sort of preview before the call, we say this about a lot of markets that, it's challenging and you really have to do the work and everything. But I think children's books, as you'll hear from this podcast, is a little bit of a different level. Amy, do you want to start by talking through some of the takeaways that you got from the event?
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, Penny, I absolutely agree with you that all book marketing is challenging. All branding is challenging in its own way. But the children's book market is just so different, than all the other genres and topics that have a lot of crossover. The children's book market, there's just a lot that is totally unique to that. So anyway, let's dive in. So the biggest standout to me was that when I asked kids, and this is all ages, we had all class ages, so kindergarten to fifth grade got to come in and go through here, how they decided on what books they wanted to choose and buy. Many of them responded with something along the lines of, I like the cover, or I love the cover, insert all the kid words now. And it's worth noting that in every case, when they, brought their books up to me, because they wanted, younger kids, it was really cute because they needed help with the math. Like they brought up 10 books and they're like, my mom gave me $10. And it's like, oh, I'm breaking so many hearts today. But needless to say, every time they said that, the covers were in fact excellent.
Yeah.
Like these kids were spot on. When they were like, I picked this book because I like the cover. They were absolutely right. The cover was always amazing. I was wowed every single time a kid pointed out that that's why they chose a book. They may know nothing else about it, but they're like, I like the cover. I'm like, fair enough, you little consumer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, and I absolutely love hearing that. And we do talk about covers a lot, and we talk about it on the blog. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that we're very cover focused. I love that these young book consumers are as discerning as adult shoppers, but I want to add something that maybe makes this a little bit more crucial, that your cover is important. It's not, and please note, just as a sidebar, I'm not saying that you can skate by when you're pitching to adult shoppers, but consider that when somebody lands on your Amazon book page, hypothetically, you can often wow people with your book description, right? Which in general, when it comes to book fairs, the book cover, obviously, they're not looking at the description and whatnot. But I would imagine, and I know I'm a little bit inserting something that we didn't really address necessarily in the green room prior to the call, but when I've done book fairs for adult book fairs, they will flip the book over to see what the book is about. Did you see a lot of that when kids were looking at books, or were they just, oh my gosh, I love this cover, I want this book?
No, it was definitely, obviously the independent readers, would sometimes kind of browse through them, but really it was, from what I could tell, it was just much more of a gut reaction to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they have this other sense that adults lose along the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that absolutely makes sense, because I think that's an important takeaway, that first impressions are important. And don't think that you can skirt by with something that is less than a stellar cover. All right, on to the next one. Sorry for that sidetrack, but I thought it was just asking.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You're right. With adults, you do maybe have a second chance with them, but with kids, like shiny object, they move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So the second biggest standout was that kids are brand loyal extremists, is what I like to call them. And they definitely gravitate to a series. So if you start with a book concept and have plans for it to be a series of some sort, like do not slack on this. Mm-hmm. Not only did the kids definitely gravitate to a series, they have a lot more free time than adults do in general. So they can really power through books like it's literally their job. So they absolutely, they like a series. Kids are hardcore into what's next, what's next, what's next, what's next. So, we obviously encourage adults to stick to a particular, a consistent schedule when it comes to writing a series. I would say with kiddos, you absolutely have to stay competitive with your release schedule.
Yeah. And I think that, we talk a lot about smart planning. That should probably be on some of our merchandise as well, because I know we mentioned this many, many times, but we typically don't encourage you to hold off on a release that's ready to go. If you're a children's book author, especially if you're writing for independent readers, you might want to consider releasing book one when you have book two, or even book 2 and 3 ready to go, because they're pretty eager to get their hands on that series.
Yes, absolutely. It was really interesting to see that as well. For as impulsive as they may sound when it comes to the cover, they were very strategic in noticing whether or not there was a book 2, 3, and 4 already ready for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so let's see. The next takeaway, I thought this was really interesting. Kids today, as anybody with kiddos know, or that's around kiddos, they're really savvy. They're exposed to a lot of different kinds of media and apps. I mean, they even do it in schools now. So even for parents that don't do a lot of screen time at home, schools are utilizing technology. So there's really no way around that anymore. And they get a lot of stimulation. So the bar is really high. And I can tell you that the book fair taught me that with this, funny, quirky titles and characters really appealed to kids. They get a lot thrown at them. And there's, when I compare how many TV shows that I potentially could have watched as a kid versus now, it just blows my mind, how many.
Yeah.
So just using that as an example, it was really interesting to see that kids absolutely noticed a unique character or a character that had a really quirky personality trait, things like that really made the book concept stand out. It wasn't just the same old done in a new way.
Yeah. I think that, and I can totally see that, because I think even though obviously I'm not the buyer market for the children's book, I know from just the work that we've done in the children's book market that the genre gets flooded with a lot of the same ideas and concepts on repeat. So, I think that Harry Potter, even though it's maybe slightly out of the age range that you're talking about, but Harry Potter is kind of a great idea, right? So Harry Potter became famous, and then all of a sudden you see the industry is flooded with wizards, and quirky uniqueness is really the smart thing to aim for. And I'm not necessarily saying ignore the trends, but I think that, to your point, kids get inundated with so much. It's those are the kinds of things that stand out. So, all right. So what's the next one?
So this one spoke to me on a personal level. Kids, this just blew my mind, honestly, out of all of these things. This one was probably what caught me off guard the most, that I didn't go, oh, that makes sense right away. Kids are seemingly excited about these kind of suspense and thriller concepts at a much younger age than they used to be. I was seeing it as young as 3rd grade. So we're talking independent reader, a kid that can pick up a book and get through, a chapter
Right.
without a lot of, help and assistance. So, about 8, 9 years old starting at. And these were such hot items at the book fair. We literally couldn't keep them on the shelves. That part was very exciting, that when we'd have to keep so many in the box and only put out so many at once. And I didn't know this rule existed until the slightly older kids started showing up, but we had to enforce a rule about kids not buying more than one copy of a single title.
Oh,
Because I know we had these smart little shoppers that wanted to snag a copy for their friend, because these kids had already talked about what books they decided were cool and what everybody had to be reading.
uh-huh.
It was just so amazing that they kind of developed their own little underground book swap, So while we couldn't let them buy multiple copies, I was like, I understand where you're coming from. I see you,
I love that. That's great. And this reminds me, and this also is going to date me, but when I was a kid, when I was that age, I was just churning through Nancy Drew mysteries like crazy, right? And the Hardy Boys. And again, I know I really just dated myself, but I used to love those books because they were paced really well. You had this smart, savvy female protagonist that, especially young girls could really admire, right? And they were very well written. They were all well written. And then when the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew crossed over, and then, oh, that was such an exciting time. Now I want to go back and read them. Again, I love those. And in case this hasn't come up before, I think we mentioned it when we started the show today, and we've mentioned it a few times on the show, but Amy and I are big fans of true crime. In fact, I really get disappointed when Amy has found a podcast that she doesn't share with me, because she finds the best podcasts. Like, you really want to be on her podcast friend list because she finds the best true crime podcast, but we're huge fans of that genre as well. And I think that it is a good point to make. We see a lot of authors kind of missing the mark on what's appropriate for the age group they think they're writing for. So not really so much skewing to write content that's too mature, but actually writing content that's too simplistic or immature. So they underestimate the level of the reader. And a lot of times I think this comes from authors who have a great idea for a book, for a children's, kids book or a young adult book, but don't necessarily understand or have not immersed themselves in the market. And as Amy mentioned, kids today are savvy, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to get all sketchy and throw blood and gore at them and thrillers and things like that. But it does mean that as a children's book author, I mean, you really need to do your market research and get a feel for what kids in your target age group really are reading. And, you might dream of writing a sweet story inspired by your granddaughter, but you also should consider the possibility that that's not going to translate to a story that other kids, her age want to read. And I think that, in fact, you inspired an idea in me. I think if you want to write a children's book, go work a book fair, get that kind of, just spend some time and really see what your target audience wants. Okay. And Amy, you have a couple more, right? Do you have a couple more takeaways from the book fair?
Yes. And I think your point about, kind of pulling yourself out of this story that you've had in mind for a while, or something that's really personal to you. I know that we've done children's book projects like that are a bit more challenging, because it is like, you really have to also be a smart business owner. And yes, like, you have to be able to step outside of your own head with a concept sometimes. And like Penny recommended, you have to do your market research still and find a way to smartly merge your idea with what the market wants, and find a way to marry those two, so you don't end up with this kind of little, deserted island of a concept that sadly doesn't get the attention that it deserves. But, yes, we definitely have a couple more. This one is really important for your long-term plan as a children's book author. Kids love to talk about things that interest them and immerse themselves in a brand. It was so cool talking to these small kiddos about why they're buying the next book in a series. I had a lot of kids, again, we talked about series. I had a lot of kids that came up because book 4 was out, and they were just so excited to get the 4th book. And they would sit there and just talk my ear off about everything that happened leading up to this book. And it was so cute. But again, kids, brand loyal, they love to talk about things. They love to be involved. So this means that you could really, kind of put yourself above the competition by having a cool interactive website, by developing bonus content ideas, age appropriate social media content as well. These are just next level, options and strategies that, help create super fans and kids that are going to be waiting for the book fair so they could get number 4 as it comes out, or that are constantly asking their mom, like, is it out yet? Is it out yet? Like, so those kind of things. Kids, again, they're savvy. They have a lot thrown at them. So play to that and create elements that they can really kind of attach themselves to, that take them beyond just your books.
Exactly. I think that's really smart. Because I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's so much room for creativity when you're a children's book author. Lots of great branded swag. And we worked with, this is a number of years ago, we worked with a children's book author, and the book was called Kitten Cuckoo. And the book was about a friendship between a kitten and an elephant. And the whole premise of the book was that, even if someone doesn't look like you or seems to stand out, that they can still be your friend. And what the author did, which I thought was really, I mean, this goes back a bunch of years. This may actually be BA, and I say that before Amy. But the author created their own artwork. So that made it a little bit easier for them. They created downloadable coloring pages that you had to sign up to get. They also created, the author created a ringtone and computer wallpaper and all kinds of really fun stuff. And I think they were getting ready to get some funding to create stuffies. Because of course, merchandise, sometimes merchandise can cost, like creating stuffies and things like that, cost a little bit of money. But if you have the artwork, the coloring pages were super easy for them to do. Character trading cards is another idea. Easter egg clues. These are hidden messages or secret features in the book or inside jokes, things like that. And the list goes on. So I think if you're going to be competitive as a children's book author, just have plans to go beyond just the books themselves. And that's something that I find particularly fun about this genre.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge reason I love marketing campaigns for children's books and on those, because the branding brainstorms that we get to have, and it's so inspiring when we have an author that comes to us that's already kind of headed down that path and we get to build on that. It's just such a cool opportunity. And so the last note I made from the book fair was a reminder to be thoughtful about pricing. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. As a parent, I can tell you, I love to buy books for my kids, but kids' interests evolve and they change very rapidly. So, don't price your books too high. I know that books for children, especially with a lot of illustrations, can get expensive. So it's a much more complex conversation and there are other considerations to make. But the reality is parents know they'll be lucky if younger kids want to read the same book 3 times even. And independent readers will often only read a book once because then they pass it on to a friend, which is awesome. But again, for the family, it's a one-time investment, and then it's out the door. So again, we know that printing is a huge factor, things like that, but just really spend the extra time to really price out your options and know what's available to you with the intention of keeping your books as affordable as possible. So you have, it's easier for lots of different families and kiddos from different demographics to have access to your books.
Right. And I think one of the things, and I have something that I have an idea that I want to kind of challenge you on, Amy, in just a second. But one of the biggest challenges that our authors face with printing costs is printing with getting books out there is printing costs. Sorry, I kind of led with what I was going to say. Printing costs and, print on demand, it through like Ingram Spark or Amazon or BookBaby or whatever, is a very popular way to print. And the coloring palettes for print on demand has become fairly competitive with what you can do with offset. However, the cost for print on demand is much more expensive. So one of the things that I would suggest that you do is you can consider doing, so I love to do offset printing. However, there are issues with paper availability. I don't know, is there still like a paper shortage going on? It's kind of crazy. So there's some issue with paper shortages. So one of the things, I was actually coaching an author last week and I suggested to her, I said, listen, start with the print on demand. It's going to cost you a little bit more out of the gate. Get that book out there and then put in the order, because she was in a queue that was something like, 6 months out, because printers had to wait for paper and then everybody in the queue slid by months and months. And so it's become a little bit complex, but offset printing will drastically drop the price of your print book. And by drastically, I mean, and this is just off the top of my head, but if a book costs you, let's say $5 per copy to print through a print on demand system, so Amazon, Ingram Spark, BookBaby, and that's kind of on the low end. it will probably run you maybe $1.75, depending on how much color you have on the interior. So it really does cut the cost. But if the downside for this author was she was like, I don't really want to wait 6 months. And I don't blame her. She was done. She was ready to go. And this kind of blindsided her. So I said, look, start with the print on demand. You can get it out there. It's going to, and then when the book shipment comes in, you can, you have your Amazon page. It's not going to change anything. But you can start to fill these orders with something that's a little bit less expensive, because the other piece of it too, that we know is that promotion takes time, right? So unless this is your 5th or 6th or 7th book in the series and you have a massive following and a big email newsletter, if this is your first book in particular, it's probably going to take a little bit of time to get it off the ground. So the bulk of your sales may not hit on publication day. They may hit after your reviews have hit and after some, schools have adopted the book or started readings, or maybe, whatever else has gone on. And that could align really nicely with the offset printing that you do. But Amy, this is my challenging question for you. And I'm sorry that I thought about this after we hit the record on this podcast. So in 2020, Amazon prioritized their own stuff over actual book shipments. So which skewed a lot of reader preferences. So a lot of readers began adopting ebooks, right? Do you see that there is and I almost kind of already know the answer to this because I keep trying to push this question on Amy, and Amy's just like, no, but do you see a change in ebook readers for kids, or is there, do you see any of that being adopted?
I think it's hard because I think in some ways, yes, I think the struggle with that is that, as a parent, I can say for sure that I would love if my kids read more on their Kindle. And for what it's worth, my 9-year-old was gifted a Kindle for her birthday recently, so she could start reading ebooks and just, because our bookshelf is just getting a little out of control.
Yeah.
But I will say the challenge with that is just the balance of screen time, so.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I think that is the biggest thing. I think a lot of parents in theory are supportive of the Kindle option because it, you reduce the clutter around the house,
right.
Things like that. So I really think that it's, in my brain, there's this really cool market for like a Goodreads for kids, or something like that kind of leans to the focus being on the book still, but in a more digital friendly way. So it's a more supportive environment that actually helps them talk with other kids about it. Cause I think that is the challenge with the ebooks, is that it ends up being a much more just personal experience, which a lot of times that's why adults read books, is to get away from everything.
Yeah.
But kids still very much rely on their social network and things like that. And books are a big part of, finding your people and fitting in with who you want to fit in with and things like that. So I think that's kind of why, ebooks are not as popular for kids, is because we just really haven't found a way for them to incorporate it into, their social life in a way that is still healthy and productive. But right. I would love to see a Goodreads type platform for kids of the appropriate, independent reading age, because I think that they would really have a great time on a site like that lets them just geek out on all things books,
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So if somebody comes up with an app about this after the show, y'all have to credit us. Actually, you have to credit Amy and have to credit us. I sound like I'm just taking credit I'm just a credit grabber.
You put it on this podcast first, folks.
Right. Amy, I am so glad that you volunteered for this book fair. Now I am also motivated to find a local book fair and volunteer because I think that it really gave us an extra push to dedicate a show to our children's book authors, because we've talked about it before, but you came away from that book fair with so many really great insights that I greatly appreciated. And listen, if you're listening to this and you're mulling over your options, planning for an upcoming release, please do get in touch. We'd love the opportunity to brainstorm and see how we can work together. And also, as I mentioned, keep an eye out in the fall. We're going to launch our Patreon page and have lots of merchandise and all kinds of cool insider stuff for you listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Penny Sansevieri and the ever awesome Amy Cornell. This is the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. We'll see you next time.